Welcome back, everyone. I'm here again with Bill Crawford. We're going to talk about the geopolitical situation once again in Russia and Ukraine, particularly inside Ukraine. And Bill adds a very unique perspective that I clearly don't have, and that's on the effectiveness or lack thereof of the Russian air campaign at the very beginning, now, and in the future. So, Bill, let's just start with your assessment of how they did in the first phase of their operation, which is, I think primarily, I mean, what the Russians will say is it was always a feint, was always a distraction. But anybody with any intelligence who has any military experience and looks at where the Russians shifted that combat or placed that combat power in the very beginning and where their main effort was, it was clearly Kyiv. What's your assessment of how the Russians did in the first few days of that operation in suppressing Ukrainian air defenses? And so, like, your assessment, what could they have done better? What surprised you?
I feel like that's a lot to bite off, first of all. But I just think before hostilities started, I probably felt like most of the outsiders looking in, going, "Man, this is not going to go well for the Ukrainians, and it's going to be a fairly quick conflict, resulting in domination by the Russians of the Ukrainian defenses." And I think I was stunned, and I think most people were stunned at the way it unfolded. And if you think about what's going on the ground right now, I think it's a result of Russia's failure to execute a good strategy in the air. Because what you would expect in a typical modern fighting scenario, and this was all developed by a guy named John Warden in 1990-91 during the Iraq conflict, where they realized if we can fly past all of those lines of defense on the ground and take out our enemy's ability to communicate and coordinate their efforts, then we win. And so if you think about a typical strategy, you would come in with radar jamming capabilities to take out their eyes, and then you would destroy their headquarters and any of their air defense sites. And you'd make it so that you just deny them the ability to operate in the air, which would include taking out their runways, right? And it's a little puzzling that if you think about it for a second, the way I understand it, Ukraine still has the ability to launch airplanes. How is that possible? We were 4 or 5 weeks into the conflict, and none of the things I described have been done. So it's a little bit weird. I can't really assess what Russia did because I'm not fully informed on what they did, but I can tell you what they didn't do, and it was anything that makes sense, right? So I think they flew in, and probably now that I think about it, and this is just me brainstorming right now, it wouldn't surprise me if the way that their Air Force tactics and strategies are organized are around supporting the ground effort. And because that's how America used to do it, right? Hey, look, Army's in charge, Air Force do what we say, this is what we need, here's where we want you to be. And that just doesn't work. And so Russia left Ukraine with the the to operate in the air.
Let me step in really quickly.
Yeah.
So
sure.
I got to give the Army's perspective. So, and you can tell me, because I am ignorant on how the Air Force is organized, but from the outside looking in, it seems to me that there's a strategic arm of the Air Force and there's a tactical arm. When it comes to the tactical arm, the Army should absolutely be in charge. When it comes to the strategic arm, the Army should absolutely have no.
I didn't mean to hurt your feelings.
No, you didn't hurt my feelings. You didn't hurt my feelings. But there's probably some Army guy in like Alabama, like, we're gonna listen to that BS. Oh my God! Right. So I gotta address.
Well,
I gotta address that. It's not BS, by the way.
No, I would. The way I would say that is that the Air Force used to organize that way. Actually, and this is when, I mean, we're talking 30 years ago.
Which way?
There was Strategic Air Command and Tactical Air Command.
Okay.
Right, but in the 1991 Gulf War, those lines got completely blurred because you had fighter attack aircraft, attacking strategic targets. That's when the stealth fighter made its debut with its precision weapons. F-111s were dropping guided weapons. F stands for fighter, but they're basically a light bomber. It was like the lines were blurred. And so the Air Force reorganized, and they created a structure called Air Combat Command. And so they still do have like their strategic, but that's like more of the ballistic missile arm, right?
Oh, okay.
So, and I don't even know if ballistic missiles were included in Air Combat Command. And forgive me, Air Force friends who see this.
But you'll have some guy at in Missouri who's pissed off now. So we both made somebody angry.
Well, probably Nebraska for me, right? It's where Strategic Command Stratcom is, right? So
right.
They've made it more clear, like, we're going to go into a conflict. It's almost like it's about the job we're trying to do rather than the category of strategic versus tactical.
Okay, that's smart. Like, that's the way it should be, right? It's mission oriented, just like on the ground we have mission oriented, which we stole from the Germans, by the way. Don't let anybody confuse you that Auftragstaktik from World War II, but mission oriented tactics.
This is just smart for any, if you want to say, aggressor coming into a country. You need to basically disconnect the ability of the upper leadership to coordinate the efforts of anyone in the field. Mm-hmm. And then you need to take out the eyes of the people in the field so they can't fight back. And now all of a sudden it's like, what else is there to do? And in a typical U.S.-led coalition effort, that's what you see now. And so the ground forces, and I know you mentioned earlier, we have people on the ground, but they're clandestine, right? They're very few in number, and they're doing very specific things to prepare the battlefield. And then you have your mass troops who are going to come in. They almost always come in after the enemy has no longer the ability to communicate with any senior leadership or coordinate their efforts on the ground. And almost always they can't even see you coming, right, until it's too late.
And that's when the Air Force starts to take more of a tactical role.
Yeah.
So you're not dividing. It's more of a phased. Mm-hmm. Granted, it's mission dictated, but it's a phased approach. Strategic. Right. You take out the big stuff, and then you just work your way down to the effects are lower, smaller and smaller. But to the guy on the ground, seeing that A-10 come in and eviscerate a column of tanks is hugely impactful. But okay, so it's certainly the Army and the Air Force. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say. So you don't see any of that in this current conflict, and so it leaves you wondering, like, well, what were they doing? And I think actually, I mean, this is just a guess, but it could be that they just basically planned the thing backwards, thinking that air, which is weird, right? Because if they read, these are open source things. You can read U.S. Air Force tactics and strategic writing for the last 30 years. And you could read a 10-page pamphlet and you'd know how to fight that war. But the Russians don't seem to have done that.
What's your theory on, and again, this is outside of both our expertise, right? So just the audience will understand that this is all this part is speculation, and informed judgment. Why didn't they? And again, I want to frame this not from like, we're not trying to insult the Russian mindset. We're actually trying to understand why. I can tell you like off the top of my head, if I really, really think through this, So one thing you said that resonated was they didn't destroy the airfields. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
At Hostomel, I can understand why. Hostomel is that just north of Kyiv, where there was a big airfield for the Ukrainians. And the reason they didn't bomb that one is pretty clear, right? That they wanted to get the VDV paratroopers in there, and then that was going to be their resupply that would support the operation in Ukraine. However, to your other point, they didn't destroy communications. And I'm still scratching my head as to maybe they didn't know how. The best answer I can come up with is they just didn't or have not invested in the resources to have that capability. But again, I am completely ignorant on Russian, technology, technology related to their air services or air force to understand that.
I saw an analyst. He's actually an auditor. He's an auditor for the U.S. military. And it's an interesting perspective, right? Because you're like, well, this guy's more of an accountant type than a warrior.
Well, if he's asking where all the money went in the investment, that he's a great guy to be looking at this because Putin made this investment.
Right. And so, well, it's not just that, but he noticed that when you find an organization that is corrupt at the top, it's corrupt all the way through. It's like so the tools of cooperation used to manage the Russian military and supply chain are all power tools, which means coercion, threats, fear, and intimidation. And when you have a military force that's how they manage it, and then you also loop in corruption, they weren't able to use their own secure communications. So the Russians are using cell phones to talk to each other. And Ukrainians have the ability to drop in on those cell phone calls, pinpoint where their leaders are, and take them out.
Bill, we can drop off. Like if you get on a ham radio, you can listen to Russian. I'm dead serious. There's a New York Times article where someone is like dropped in on a conversation and was literally whistling Dixie.
So think about it for a second, though. If you've got a corrupt organization from the top down, and people taking what's in it for them, you're going to find equipment that's not prepared or maintained properly. You're going to find supplies that the books say are there, but they're not, and capabilities. And by the way, think about the failure of Russian intelligence. So I don't bomb their runways because I believe I'm the head of, I'm making these decisions. I believe that from what my intel people are telling me, which are lies,
right,
that the people on the ground are going to capitulate quickly, and that there's no real need to come in with a significant capability here because we're better than them, right? And so their whole strategy was built on a set of theories that were based on false or misleading information, bad equipment, and the wrong way to manage your organization, where the command and control is very autocratic rather than allowing people to understand the objective and act for themselves. But it's just a recipe for disaster. If we had invaded, or say not we, I don't want to, forgive me. If a hostile,
if you were in control, if you were in control, I'm making the question a little bit harder for you, but it'll be a fairer question. If you were in control of the Russian Air Force, how would you do it? So you don't have access to kind of all the U.S. capabilities, but how would you have done it?
Well, I mean, that's a tough question because I don't know what Russia's capabilities are, right? But I would say I would set some objectives for myself. One, I would eliminate the Ukrainian leadership ability to coordinate and direct efforts on the ground. That would mean jamming communications and destroying communications, and enemy air defenses. right? So those would be my two prime objectives. And until those were accomplished, I don't even know if I'd roll a tank over the line.
Well, and
There's
that's
no
the other
need
thing
to.
too. As like American ground like veterans or like Army and Marine Corps veterans are watching this thing, a lot of them are actually going over there because they're like, wow, I mean, the Russians are like weaker than we thought. What they don't quite grasp is that we've all been spoiled in two primary areas, right? The first area is we never need to look up.
Right.
Right? Like, and that cannot be underestimated. Even the Ukrainians still have to look up.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, we never had logistical issues, right? Like we had all the the U.S. military has solved that problem, right? And it's traditionally
supply chain guys win the war, right? It's like you're out fighting, but without all the stuff you need out in the field, you're not going to do it. Yeah.
So that said, like just some of the mistakes that I saw are mind-boggling, and I'm still trying to understand how they happen. So the VDV, which is the Russian version of the 82nd Airborne, although I probably just insulted everyone in the 82nd Airborne by saying that. Like they're not equivalent. Yeah, they're not equivalent at all, right? Roman Skarsky, who's been on this show, who is an 82nd Airborne veteran, he would say that the VDV is, more of an arm of the state for intimidation as opposed to like an 82nd Airborne equivalent designed to seize airfields, right? And kind of light airborne infantry sort of stuff. But the kind of mistakes that we've seen is that you have troops on Ilyushin 76 transport aircraft shot down before they even get to the objective. So like before Bucha, I actually felt sorry for those guys. Like they didn't even get to fight. They didn't even have a chance. They were shot. Now after Bucha, it's like good. But why would you fly an aircraft filled with, like, we're not even talking about like moving tanks across the border. We're talking about flying highly vulnerable troops over a target objective and still not having control over taking out these air defense systems. Now, is there any reason why the Russians just would have thought that maybe took out the air defense systems, but they didn't? Like help me understand that. Because they can't be that incompetent. They can't be that incompetent. There has to be a reason.
I don't know. My feeling is, my gut reaction is, if you're the intelligence officer on the ground, and Vladimir Putin says, "Hey, do we have any threats down there?" Well, like, what's going to happen if I say yes? What's going to happen? And so that's one. I mean, I just can't imagine that the level of incompetence is that high, right? And so I think that it has to do with their reluctance to share the truth with people above them.
But Bill, like, even if you knew, and again, I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm not being intentionally hostile. If you're on the ground and you knew 30 men would die if you didn't tell the truth, but your life might be forfeit. Like you might, like there's a chance, but there's 100% chance or an extremely high chance that 30 men would die before they had a chance to do anything. Wouldn't you tell the truth?
Well, I don't know if they knew. Like, it's like, hey, look, there might be an anti-aircraft battery out there. There might not. How do we know? I don't think their intelligence gathering capability is very good. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that they have, and I think all comes back to their, I think they've been lying about their capabilities for 20 years.
And by the way, like, it's the most effective propaganda campaign I've ever seen. So like before this invasion, I would have told you that Russia had the best human intelligence capability in the world, probably better than our own. Mm-hmm. Okay. They certainly probably still have the best influence operations, right? Well, no, actually, they don't know after this. After this, they're not influencing anybody. But in the U.S., like if Putin had just stuck to turning Americans against each other, he would win in 10 years. But he decided to expose like the rot that's inherent in the Russian system by rolling those rotten tanks across the border.
Yeah.
So like before this, I mean, Bill, as you know, I used to fight using Russian doctrine and tactics to train the U.S. military.
Yep.
One of the things that has made me feel like I've done something noble in my life is that I showed and prepared the U.S. military, like the entire U.S. military, to face a Russian enemy who is far more competent than the actual Russian enemy. Like what we face so far is the worst they're ever going to see. Full stop.
Yeah.
Full stop. So if we actually have to get into combat with them, we will wipe the floor with them.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. They're just now here's the downside, not the downside. It's a counter view to that, and that is that and you know this. The psychology of fighting a war is complicated.
Yeah.
And to keep a highly motivated force fighting is difficult when you're an aggressor entering a country full of people who have nothing to lose because you've already destroyed their city, you've killed their children, you've driven off their families, and they're back fighting. Right? They have everything to fight for, and you have nothing to fight for. And if we were to turn the tables on this same Russian military and a hostile force invaded Russia, I think you'd see a very different outcome because then their motivation changes, their mindset changes, and their resourcefulness goes up. So right now, I think you're seeing the ability of Ukraine to take advantage of lack of initiative, lack of resourcefulness, and lack of motivation, all of which are plaguing the Russian military. Other than the few purely evil people, and I think you see evidence that there are way more of those than you would suspect, and their willingness to do things that just seem so unimaginable to individuals, to families, to cities. And you're like, what kind of monster is willing to do those kinds of things? And that's scary because I don't know how many there are. I think that there's lots and lots and lots of great, decent Russian people, including fighting in their military, who don't want to be there, who just find themselves, I have no way out. I don't know what else to do.
Or to be fair,
that there are some just really horrific people in there too.
Yeah, or to be fair, like there are. I kind of don't want to say this, but I have to say this, right? Particularly like those who've partaken in the profession of arms have to say these things because it's a truth that you're not going to see in the media right now. There are some Russians who are, who see this as a noble fight, right? Who, see the Ukrainians as their misguided cousins. Like we're going to be stronger. Again, I don't believe this. I'll be very clear. I don't believe this.
Right. No, I think you're right. But that's well. Plus, the propaganda engine there is doing its best to convince people that that's the case, right?
Right, and then the military is the ultimate propaganda engine because you can cut off other information sources, right? But even then, like I remember during the Kosovo situation, I was in Scout Platoon Leaders course, the Scout Platoon Leaders course. So like just, and we were doing like rifle PT, and we started singing songs about killing Serbs, and I'm like, I don't have anything against Serbs. Like this is kind of surreal. Like I don't, I don't. But I could kind of see through it. I'm like, all right, I get it. Like we're doing this thing, but like, there's no reason to think about this aggressive. We can do this analytically and think think through it analytically.
Yeah.
There are, like all people, right? There are some good good Russians, just like there were some good Germans, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And if you look at a lot of the soldiers who take part in this conflict, they're from like far-flung regions throughout Russia and its
Hmm.
territories that don't have any, just much like in the U.S. military,
Yeah,
don't have any good job prospects. But I mean, like, but worse, right? Like these guys are really out
right,
on the
right.
frontier, and they're kind of just brought across the border, and they're told to do these things. Um, and then you go into a population where the moment you turn your back on them, they're on a cell phone calling in your grid coordinates, right? And like, look, the Ukrainians are doing that as they should be.
Hmm.
But when you're seeing all your friends, again, I'm playing devil's advocate, right? When you're seeing all your friends get killed around you, and you're surrounded by this hostile population that you didn't choose to get in this fight. And in these situations, there's been psychological studies by Schultz and Janowitz, who they did research following World War II on like why the German soldiers fought, and it wasn't because they were like big Nazis or wanted to follow Hitler. And it was never really for political reasons. It was what they found is that they focused on primary groups, right? It was fighting for the guy to your left and to your right. And
Hmm.
that's why they fought. And that's why many of these Russians are fighting. So they're going to do extreme things like put snipers, I can see an officer saying just like, you know what, screw it. Like, we keep getting killed. If anybody crosses Yablunska Street, shoot them. And that's what, this Russian sniper did. Now, you know, a good military would, or a more professional military would have signs and things like that, because there are things that like Blackwater used to do, right? So in the event, again, this is apocryphal. I don't know if it's true, so take it with a grain of salt. But when they would drive through Route Irish, they would have water bottles filled with urine that they would just throw at people who came too close, which is disgusting and gross, but it's not Bucha scale massacre.
Right.
However, what they allegedly would also do is anytime there was a suicide bombing, if they saw anyone within 100, several hundred meters with a cell phone in their hand, they'd shoot them. Right? So, there's kind of that aspect of the war that's a little bit harder to tease out. But then there are clear cases of just absolute utter human depravity. And these people, like, if you could crucify them, you should. And the example that we were talking about a little bit earlier is this soldier who, on video, raped a 1-year-old toddler on camera in front of the parents, and then murdered the child. And and that's in the media. That's out in the media. Apparently, it's a video. I did not watch it because I am not a pedophile. But the reports that that you just read in the media, that's there was a rape, it was on camera, and the child was killed. Like those are facts. The soldier was apprehended in Russia after that video went viral. Those are all fact, or at least reported in the media. So likely true. Now, I have there's kind of a continued account that I've heard, and I don't want to reveal the source. I don't know if this is true. I've not verified it, but the continued account is that once this person was apprehended, they were or he let's be very clear, as a male, he was you know received some form of non-judicial punishment because he recorded everything, not because of what he did, and then was subsequently kind of slapped on the wrist for allegedly given like good job at terrorizing the population, but don't record this stuff, and then sent back to his unit. I don't know if that portion is true. We'll have to figure it out. But I did not receive that in any official source, so take that with a grain of salt. But like those sorts of things are just unconscionable and should be punished within Russia. If Russia doesn't punish it, then there's no hope for that country, at least its
You
power
know,
structure.
what you're saying, this last story you told was just horrific, and I you're the only person I've heard it from, so I pray that it's not true. But
I'll send
but
you the link. I'll send you the link. It's in report
yeah,
like Daily Mail, New York Times. I think New York Times. They've definitely reported on this stuff.
so when I was in the mission planning cell, this was for the Iraq conflict. Someone wrote on the board, "Fly with hatred in your heart," and and I thought, wow, like first of all, I don't know if I can have hatred in my heart for 36 hours in a row. Like that's a long time to
Yeah.
try to. But I disagreed with that mindset. I always felt like love your enemies is a better way to think about. But for me, the mindset of if I'm going to go to war with someone, I want to understand them. I want to have empathy, not sympathy. Sympathy, of course, means I I support and encourage, and in no way do I ever sympathize with my enemy, but I want to understand their mindset, their motivations, where they're coming from, because that's going to help me fight better. And then to also recognize that they are humans, that we are all children of God, and um, that that armed conflict, as horrible as it is, we cannot descend to the level of depravity that you just described. And I think one of the ways to do that is to recognize that your enemy is human, that your enemy is is in many ways like you, and then to do the right thing in the right moment, right? Which may still be to take their life if they are engaged in armed conflict, but to recognize that that doesn't apply to a lot of the people in the battle space, and that you've got to be discerning and apply good judgment and restraint. And I think that those values are what make America, uh, our military and our culture and our country, what it is.
So here it is. So the soldier's name, it's actually kind of almost ironic. His name is Alexei Bichkov. Let me just see. So like I'm not. It sounds so unbelievable because even if you try, like even if we tried to descend to the level of this depraved individual, I don't think we could.
I mean, humans are capable of all kinds of bad things when it becomes normalized, right? So,
Mhm.
what's your what do you want your audience to take away from this portion of our conversation?
Um, how the horrors of war can kind of confuse and inflame passions in terms of kind of influencing populations, right? So like for me in particular, this makes me want the US to get involved as soon as
Mm,
possible to stop the violence. And like there is room for emotion in decision making as long as it's tempered by an analytical understanding of what the risks are. And what I tend to, despite what I'm talking about and what I'm choosing to talk about on some of these things and the way I'm reacting to it and processing it, I tend to have a very analytical approach to the world. And prior to the conflict, we should not get involved. Other than supporting and giving weapons to the Ukrainians.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I see, the way the Russians are conducting this campaign, I feel like my emotions are forcing me to reassess my initial analytical understanding. And the reason is the logic I come up with is, if they're going to behave in such a depraved fashion here and they succeed here, the next place where they're going to do this is Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, perhaps Finland now, right? Because and if this quote unquote works in terms of terrorizing the population, systematic brutality, things like that, there will be more of it, because you always get more of something that you perceive as successful. And my view from an analytical standpoint is, the sooner we get involved and completely and utterly annihilate all Russian combat power within Ukraine, and I would keep it confined to Ukraine, the sooner this ends, and the sooner we stop this continued aggression on Russia's borders. And we let Crimea happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do anything there. And what did it get us? It got us this.
Yeah.
Now, I fully understand the risks, right, about escalation and things like that, but Putin doesn't care about escalation. He flew two Sukhoi 24 aircraft over Gotland, which is owned by the Swedish, with nuclear weapons on board. I think it was on March 2nd, or March 1st, March 2nd. Putin's gonna do what Putin's gonna do. I think what we need to do is just deny him the ability to execute operations in Ukraine. Full stop. I think the Ukrainians have been doing a phenomenal, have been having phenomenal success in the north, but the terrain in the south puts them at a disadvantage against Russian firepower. And I'm worried that once they get Mariupol, which they may already be close to having,
mm-hmm.
even if Putin loses this thing, if he gets to keep all that land, he wins, right? Despite how damaging this was. And that's what he's trying to do. He's aiming for that May 9th victory in Europe, or whatever they call it, the Great Patriotic War anniversary in Moscow. He has about 3 to 4 weeks to show and declare some form of victory. And when you have a group of marauders that are doing these sorts of things, shooting, tying people up, shooting them in the back, it's just it's changed my view of this conflict fundamentally. And is emotion a big part of it? Absolutely. I'm absolutely outraged. And I'll be there was a tiny glimmer in the beginning of me wanting to go over there and do something about it. Now, look, I have the spoiled mentality of logistics and not having to worry about air cover and things like that. That if you make that decision, you have to tell yourself, look, if I go over there, I'm going over there to die. And I'm not ready to die yet.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's that. But to your point, let's move let's move on. You're always very subtle, and I know exactly what you're trying to communicate. But yeah, it's not a very happy topic. Let's talk about another happy topic.
Well, I've got to actually run in just a minute or two here. I've got a meeting coming up in town that I got to get to. So,
one last question for you.
Yep, that sounds great.
Flying nuclear weapons over Gotland like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that you've had training because you're a stealth bomber pilot, and that was potentially a payload on the stealth bomber?
It's nuclear capable for sure.
Okay. Is that something that you could even imagine somebody ordering you to do as like a demonstration?
For us, no one would ever do that. There was an incident after I got out of the Air Force where a U.S. bomber flew with nuclear payload from one base to another inside the States by accident. Like they just didn't know the bombs were on there, right? And it was like, or else the pilots knew but thought it was authorized. A little bit of a situation where these nuclear weapons were not fully under control or accounted for, and it was really bad. Like it was big publicity all over the news, and I know some people lost their, like some higher level, like base level leadership lost their jobs over it. So now I also understand, and this could be wrong, but this is my understanding. When the U.S. developed its command and control procedures and resources for our nuclear arsenal, we decided to also share that with the Russians. This is like 60, 70 years ago, whenever it was, because we felt like it would be safer for us to have them implement a sound command and control structure that would eliminate the chance of an inadvertent or rogue nuclear attack. So if you put those two things together, one, it could have been inadvertent, or two, it was almost insane demonstration of power, right? In a way that you're like, I haven't heard of this before. I don't know why they would do it, and I don't know enough about the details to know anything other than that. But it would be this would be considered, if the U.S. did something like that, it would be the highest level of provocation, I think, short of actually
Dropping something.
Yeah, it's a pretty serious thing.
And I wouldn't imagine that it would be that easy for Russian pilots like that to go rogue. And by the way, Russian pilots are going to be a little bit more intelligent than the average ground pounder, right? So it's not something that they would just. I mean, my personal view is that it came directly from the top to do that.
Yeah, well, and like I said, if it did, if we had done something like that, the United States, it would be perceived as, I mean, just short of an act of war, right? It's a very serious thing. So, well, right. I hope that our conversation was meaningful for the folks listening, and I'm grateful grateful for your friendship, and grateful that you considered me someone you'd want to talk to here.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, for spending your very busy and valuable time with me, and I hope there'll be many more. And at some point, I'll come out and visit you in your non-disclosed location, wherever that may be.
That sounds great.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.